Our theme is economic justice and economic inequality, and tonight I'm really excited to have an event on the U.S.-Mexico borderlands and the relationship between families and immigration and poverty. And before I introduce our panel, I have a very large number of announcements to make. And so if you're still getting cookies or finding a seat, that's fine. We're in no danger of starting anytime soon. But these are really interesting announcements. And so I'd like to give each one their due. The first one is from Linda Mahan, who I was just talking to. Linda's back there in the red. And Linda is from Plymouth Congregational Church here in Fort Collins, right down here on Prospect. And she and some other folks from Plymouth have been organizing a study group that has been educating themselves over the last few years about immigration issues. And they've discovered that as they learn about one thing, they discover new things that they need to learn about immigration policy, about the humanity behind immigration, about law. And they would like to invite anyone else who's interested in joining them in kind of any level of commitment, as much as you're comfortable with. But they're interested in gathering people from different congregations to kind of form an immigration study group that will then be seeds to spread education around to other congregations. And so they're very excited about the possibility of other people joining them and then promoting education about immigration at their own churches. And so Linda has a sign-up sheet on this back corner table near the exit, and she also will be available after our event tonight to tell you more about what she's envisioning. And next announcement is Our Savior's Lutheran Church is sponsoring a Borderlands immersion experience where they're going to take people to the border to learn about it. And there are flyers for this in the back on the same table with Linda's sign-up sheet. And so if you're interested in learning more about Our Savior's Lutherans trip to the border, grab one of these flyers afterwards. And then, to plug TIR events here, we have a couple coming up. We have two more before the end of our season. For those of you who may have been disappointed when Charlie Clark got stuck at LaGuardia Airport until about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we've rescheduled him. He was even more disappointed about having to do that than we were. But he is an economist at St. John's University, and we've invited him to come and talk about economic inequality from an economist's standpoint. We've looked at it from an ethical perspective, from the perspective of poverty and our poverty simulation. Tonight we're going to look at immigration. But why is economic inequality a problem, even from a hardcore economics perspective? He's going to come and talk about that. That will be on April 14th. And guess what? We've got a flyer in the back for that too. Our final event will take place on April 28th. It's titled Stability for People, Stability for Communities, and it will be a panel discussion on homelessness right here in Fort Collins. We've been looking at economics on a national and global level. Let's look at it right here in our own backyards as well. So I hope you can, got a flyer. So I hope you can come to those events as well. And the last thing I want to do before I turn it over to our panelists here is I'd like to recognize Pastor Steve Easterday McPadden, who I also was talking to. Oh, there he is in the very back. Wave, Steve. Steve is the senior pastor here at First United Methodist Church, and we have received news recently that he will be moving on this summer to Grand Junction, I think, to pastor another church. And I just wanted to publicly thank Steve for all he's done to support the Theologian in Residence program over the last few years since he's been here. Steve has made this venue available to us. He has given his staff time to work with us, including David Reed, who's just been an invaluable member of our board. I was telling him beforehand, we were homeless about the time that he came to Fort Collins, and he's provided us a home, and so we're really grateful with you, and we wish you and Kim all the best as you move on to new adventures. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for us to be here and to be able to offer it. I always find myself feeling very humble at that kind of kind words. It's been very, it's been a joy to host you, and it's been a great expression of ecumenism that I really love and appreciate. I love being a part of. I've learned a lot, and I think the fun thing is my wife got kissed on the cheek by EJ Dion. And every Friday afternoon, if I'm in the car with her, I gotta listen to my friend EJ. So, he has a very close place in heart, and you always will. It's been a pleasure for real, Jared, and I wish everybody the best. It's just a very unique time in the life of the church, and glad we can be a part of support.
Thank you. And now for our event this evening. I have been thinking about this evening. I didn't know exactly when or in what format it would take place, but I've been thinking about it and hoping for it for several years. I met Mike Wilson in Ajo, Arizona, in southern Arizona in 2011. And I started thinking what a fascinating and amazing story that he has to tell about his work, about his own personal past. And I started thinking I'd like to bring him to Fort Collins, to CSU, to TIR. And a few months later, Michael Baxter emailed me and asked about TIR. And we were able to bring him here a few months after that. And some of you may recall when he talked about his efforts to combine peace activism and ministry to veterans. I think it's been one of my personal favorite TIR events over the last several years. And that night he introduced me to his then fiancée, now wife, Kathleen Glynn. And she told me, I only talked to her for a few minutes, but she told me about her work as an immigration attorney in Denver. And I think that night, this panel was born in my mind, that I wanted to bring these people together. They're three of my very favorite people because they really walk their talk. They're people who have devoted their lives to ministering to others, who care deeply for other people, but don't let the care just stay within themselves, but actually have organized their lives around trying to serve others, particularly those in very great need. And so I'm thrilled to have them tonight. We're going to do this in a kind of an interview format, a little different than how we often do things at TIR. And so Michael Baxter is going to play Phil Donahue and ask the questions and moderate. And one of the first questions he's going to ask is tell us about what you do. So I'm not going to spend time belaboring that. I'll let them speak for themselves about their really amazing activities. Before we move in, I'd also like to acknowledge Susan Ruff, who is Mike's partner, and she's been able to be with us the last several days, and having the two of them here in town and being able to introduce them to my friends and my students and colleagues at CSU has just been a real blessing for me. And I've heard them talk about their work before, but getting to hear again in more detail has just been really great. So the four of you, thank you for being with us here today. And I think I'll turn it over to Michael now to get us started.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that kind introduction. These things happen. Yeah, I can give the assignment of being Phil Donahue. I don't know how this is going to work. But maybe at some point I'll put my hand up and go, station break. We're all gathered here. I need to say something else too. It's a great sacrifice for somebody to be here because there's a basketball game going on right now. It's close to many of our hearts, and we just have to put that in the hands of God, Wichita State, Notre Dame, where I taught for 15 years. I also want to say that we want to make this conversational. So we will begin with each speaker speaking, but then if people raise their hands and so on, I'll be mindful of that and try to work comments into what is said and really have looks like a 70-person conversation about matters that are important to all of us. For I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I think each of our speakers tonight, in one way or another, embodied and heeded that injunction. Welcome to the stranger. And so they have a story to tell and about how they got involved. And we're here because we want to hear it. So I want to invite each of you to explain how you got into the work that you find yourselves now. And then we're going to take it from there. So why don't I ask the lovely woman to my left to get us started.
Thanks. Okay. So again, my name is Kathleen Glynn, and since 2007, I've worked as an immigration attorney, primarily with a nonprofit called the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network out of Westminster, Colorado, right north of Denver. And REMAIN is the acronym for short, has two main programs. So I worked with adults who were detained at the Immigration and Customs facility in Aurora. And then the majority of my work has been with children in the children's program. I had my third child, Michael's first, last March. So I took a little break from my work and have just gone back into practice a couple months ago. But I've primarily worked with unaccompanied children, and I know Mike and I will probably talk about kids throughout our event tonight. But the majority of the children with whom I work have crossed the border alone, either fleeing violence or searching for family here, often taken into custody at the border by Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, placed in detention until they could find family. And the way that they arrive in Denver is that they have a grandparent, a mother. I had a client whose uncle's ex-wife decided to get him out of custody. And then once they're placed with relatives here in Colorado, must appear before the immigration courts and defend their right to stay here or be deported. So much of what I do is to try and meet with children and see if they fit within our very rigid immigration laws. Regardless of the fact of how someone came into the United States, oftentimes there is a way for them to become a lawful permanent resident and then a citizen, or to gain some type of visa and become a lawful permanent resident and then a citizen. And so our work as, basically we're the Immigrant and Defense Council, is to see if these folks who come to us, and primarily children, fit within one of those rigid pathways to be able to stay in the United States. How I got into this, working with the immigrant community, is I was fortunate enough as a sophomore in college to withdraw from Notre Dame for a semester, much to my mother's chagrin, to participate in a study abroad program through a teeny tiny college in Minnesota called Augsburg College. And they, in the early 90s and late 80s, had amazing programs in Mexico and Central America and in Africa. And so more than just studying, we were actually visiting with people and learning from their experiences. And we spent a week in El Salvador in 1992 when the peace accords had just been signed, learning about what was going on. It was my first exposure as an 18-year-old coming from a very a place of privilege of learning about what was going on in Central America. I grew up in Cleveland in Ohio, and so I had never known about the murders of the nuns that took place there, one of whom was from Cleveland. And all of this was kind of a radicalization, consciousness raising for myself, and learning the links between privilege and oppression. We spoke with many members of the FMLN who were coming back to El Salvador, who were trying to build a life. We're talking about farming, we're talking about land use, and there, as we were going through these fields where the farmers were talking about how they were trying to do sustainable agriculture, I see a little sign from the company where my father worked, which basically manufactured genetically modified seeds, right? Right there in El Salvador, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how are we all connected and how are we linked together? And as we were leaving that week, I had a chance to meet with an older Salvadoran campesina woman. She probably wasn't that old, she's probably my age, right? But she was old at the time when I was 18. And she said, or I said to her, or she said to me, what are you going to do with all this information? I said, I want to come back here. I want to come back here and I want to work and help. And she's like, we don't need your help. She said, the problem isn't here. You need to go back to the United States and you need to work there because that's where the problem is. And I took that to heart, and I, throughout my life, have tried to work for change within the United States. I'd like to think that someday I'll do more of, impact litigation or big structural change. But I found that really where my heart is working with people and working with individuals. I worked when I graduated from college with a homeless shelter, a Catholic worker in Phoenix. Then I worked with a group in Tucson called Border Links that did experiential education seminars along the border. Mike and I have some mutual friends from there. And when I became a lawyer, it became clear to me that what I wanted to do was work with immigrants. And a lot of what we do is help navigate them through a very unjust system. So it is a struggle and it is tiring for the people with whom I work because it's frustrating, because they don't understand what's going on most of the time. And which is why it is important to have strong legal advocates, so that you can, at least I feel like that's my role, is not to do something for my clients, but rather to help them understand what's happening, educate them as to the laws so that they can make their own decisions about what they can and would like to do.
What's the question again?
Sorry. He's the one that, he talks so much at home that when I get the microphone, I just have to go for it.
I'll get you back. I think I learned a few things about my wife.
No, we want to know what you do and how you got there.
Okay.
At least I do.
That's all that matters.
Right.
What I started doing in 2002 on my reservation, the Donald Nation, shares about 75 miles east to us with the Mexican state of Sonora. So many migrants have been coming across the reservation, the boundary line. Not only recently, but probably for the last 10,000 years, including us going into Mexico and them coming what we now know as the United States. In 2001, 2002, I had just dropped out seminary. So I was a Presbyterian lay pastor. By the way, I'm a recovering Presbyterian from the Reform tradition. So I feel at home. I was on the reservation. I had 4 chapels that I had to minister to. And there was a huge number of migrants dying on my tribal land. At that time, one migration trail was the deadliest migrant trail in the United States. In 2010, the Pima County Office of Medical Examiner, the county morgue, that receives all the human remains of migrants that have died, the county morgue receives them, tries to identify them, and tries to send them back to their sending countries and communities. So this is a public document. This is not Mike Wilson saying it. This is the county government. So just to give you a snapshot of what was going on and is going on. So the final count of human remains recovered in southern Arizona was 253 over 1 year. Of that 253, 125 were on the reservation, and nobody was doing anything about it. Law enforcement, hospital, faith community, nobody was doing anything. They weren't even talking about it. So as a fellow Holocaust, that's my tribe. And as a Presbyterian lay pastor, I was convinced that I had a moral obligation to do something. I understand that you don't have to have a PhD in theology. You don't need to be a theologian to understand where human beings are dying. That's when you have to put out water. So in 2002, I began putting out water for migrants coming across. Not staying, but just traveling through. And I'm talking about men, women, pregnant women, and children. So what Susan and I do now, since last June, we take into our house overnight hospitality. Refugee Central American families, young mothers and children. The oldest children that we received, a couple of 16-year-old teenagers. The youngest, a 3-year-old baby. So this shows you the desperation. Leaving Guatemala, 8 months pregnant, going to Mexico, her last month of pregnancy, and barely make it over to the border, and end up at the medical center, and having the baby later on that night. So we have taken in 124 persons. We volunteer with Catholic Social Services. They give us a call, and we go pick them up and bring them home. And they're traumatized. They're traumatized in their countries, they're traumatized coming through Mexico, and they're traumatized in Border Patrol detention. And so even when they're released to Catholic Social Services, when we go pick them up, they're still extremely traumatized. And so we do the best we can and offer that hospitality for probably about a 24-hour period. And so we've taken in, as I mentioned, 124, and they're still coming. But let me say this quickly before I move on. Immigration is nothing new in this country. You know what I'm saying? If you haven't been here for at least 10,000 years, and so I think immigrant nation, this is who we are, this is who we are as a country, as a people, as a civil society. You are here because of immigration. And we need to humble ourselves in remembering that. And remember that the brown-skinned Latino coming across is writing the current chapter called United States American Immigration History. Because your ancestors have already written their chapter. So when we talk about Latino migrants coming because of economic displacement, economic destitution, I look out in the audience and I see you have received the blessings of immigration. So immigrant nation, we need to remember that and humble ourselves as we try to serve the poorest of the poor. the most unloved, despised, marginalized in our society now. So, let me do that.
As an Irish Catholic, I can't help but think of the potato famines in the 1840s. It was the first wave of Irish who numbered 3 million in the 19th century and into the 20th of immigrants. And so true, it is all our stories. I want to ask both of you another question that maybe is on your mind too. And the question is this: we all saw the news last summer and read the newspapers, and a lot of political controversy, but beneath that, and more important to that, was the human reality of these massive numbers of people coming across borders, Texas, elsewhere, and I think both of you have seen this firsthand and know about it firsthand. Can you each shed light on what happened last summer? Now they're saying it'll be more this summer. What is going on the human level and maybe the bigger picture with these waves of immigrants coming from the south?
You want to start?
Or maybe I should.
Okay.
You go first this time.
Yeah. They're coming, and they will. We suspect there'll be another surge this summer. Economic conditions in their sending countries have not improved. Not only that, but those that have already come within the last year, they're calling back home. And because the phone call that I get from some of the families that we've helped, once in a while they call back and just to check in. So, but let me say this before I forget about these families calling back in. The first family we had was a mother and a 4-year-old daughter. And we didn't know that the mother was pregnant. She was 4 months pregnant. And so she finally made it to Florida. And so probably later on that summer, she called again just to say hello. And she told us that she was pregnant and that she was due in November. So she didn't call back until in February to let us know that her and her daughter, the family back together with her husband. And then she had the baby. She had the baby in November, and she named her baby girl after Susan. So this is what hospitality. They're in our house less than 24 hours, and so this is what it is to welcome the stranger into your house for less than 24 hours, and they remember that. And she names her American-born baby after Susan. This is what we are. This is what we do. We take them to our house, and we suspect that word is getting back to Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, everywhere, or certainly Central America, that we sort of anticipate another surge coming in. And it really strains Catholic Social Services. It really strains the volunteers. It puts a strain on Sudanite. It really takes at least 2 people and 1 fluent Spanish speaker just to take care of 1 family overnight. So I think it's going to happen again. And how do we treat them with dignity? How do we recognize the dignity of these human beings? And I think that's what we have to do. Respect their dignity. And if I can be just a little bit preaching, remember that they are brothers and sisters in Christ. Above everything else, And that's from my faith perspective. But that's just Mike Wilson talking.
So, a couple things. Overall, immigration to the United States is actually down. The number of migrants crossing from Mexico is the lowest that it's been in decades. The surge, they call it, of children and then mothers with young children that happened last summer has been slowly building. It's not new. You can track, probably starting in 2009, there were about 6,000 to 7,000 unaccompanied children that would cross each year. 2010, it was 10,000. 2011, it was 13,000. 2012, it was 24,000. So it's been building gradually. They think the estimates that our research center in DC estimates is that last year there were almost 60,000 unaccompanied children that came across, meaning they were under 18, without a parent, and no lawful status. Then there were an additional 60,000 mothers with children who came across, just in last fiscal year alone. And I think that there's a number of factors. At least what my child clients tell me is that they're coming because of the pervasive gang violence in Central America. And it's not gang violence like gangs are doing graffiti and they're robbing people. It's a very sophisticated transnational criminal operation involving drugs and politics and arms and humans, trafficking. And the children that I see are terrified, and they're usually 15, 16, 17, who are being recruited by the gangs to transport drugs, to transport arms, to transport people. And the kids are good kids, and if you're a good kid, you want to get out of there. I also think that the numbers have to be taken in the context of U.S. history with El Salvador, with Guatemala, and with Honduras. We hardly see, at least in Colorado, I have never had a Nicaraguan client. I have never had a Costa Rican client. I've never had a client from Belize in 7 years. So what is the difference between El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and these other countries? And I think a piece of that is what happened. I know in my life more about El Salvador because, I don't know, that country just stole my heart, and I made it my mission to understand more about it. But after the Civil War, of which our country was implicit and complicit, there was a vacuum there of political structure, of economic structure, and that void was filled by these transnational criminal organizations. And that country is, the homicide rate in that country is higher now than it was in the 80s when it was in the middle of Civil War. El Salvador is it's the deadliest country in the world for women. A number of my clients talk about how they were raped by gang members or gang raped by gang members, accosted on the way to school, threatened, assaulted. It's just unbelievable what these kids have lived through. And I think part of what Mike is talking about too is how bad must it be where they are for them to take the journey through Mexico, which is a brutal, brutal journey. Mexican authorities are deporting people. So many times children come halfway through Mexico, get deported, then they start again and get deported, then they start again and get deported, and finally they make it through Mexico. Children are held ransom for more money from whoever paid people to bring them here. Many times they are trafficked midway through Mexico. The people who they paid to bring them are now saying, I haven't heard that theory. I have heard the theory that, a couple, let me think about this. I don't know the exact year, I'm trying to think. At some point, I know what it was. It was the Homeland Security Act of 2002. Congress got wise and said, yeah, we don't think that the same government entity that's trying to deport these kids should also take care of them, right? So they separated out that responsibility. So the Department of Homeland Security has the job of deporting the kids, right? Their attorneys try and deport them. Then the Department of Health and Human Services takes the kids into their care and custody. So if an unaccompanied child shows up along the border, Customs and Border Protection, which is under Homeland Security, has 72 hours to move that child to the Office of, it's called the Office of Refugee Resettlement under the Department of Health and Human Services. So the one theory that I have heard is that smugglers, not cartels, but the coyotes, right, that they get paid to accompany the kids through Mexico, essentially, that they are only taking the kids to Border Patrol and saying, here you go, because they've gotten savvy to the ways that, well, if I just give you to Border Patrol, then they're going to transport you to custody, and then you're going to get to your mom. So I don't have to go all the way to Colorado. I just have to go to El Paso, right? And it's a cheaper job for them. The same amount of money, but they don't have to make the trek internally. I see drug cartels, if you're unlucky enough to have paid a coyote who's also involved with the drug cartels, I've seen kids get wrapped up in that halfway through Mexico where they're like, okay, now you're going to have to carry this bag of drugs across the border for me through the tunnels or whatever. And the kids usually get arrested and charged as a drug trafficker and get deported. But I haven't seen that where they, does your friend think that they're like paying the kids to come and so that the Border Patrol is so overwhelmed that they, I don't know.
He's a little hazy on what the
Yeah.
motivation is.
Yeah. I just think, I mean, if you're thinking of pure numbers, it's approximately 120,000 people that crossed the border last year who turned themselves in most cases, Customs and Border Protection. I'm not sure what, I wouldn't come as an 8-month-old pregnant dragging my 2-year-old, even if somebody paid me a lot of money to do that. I don't see that. I think that Customs and Border Protection are clearly overwhelmed, and their attention is probably distracted from the cartels. But I don't think the cartels are, I think they're smart enough to not go through CBP anyway. I don't know. I'm not sure that answers your question. Maybe Mike knows.
It's one of these rampant conspiracy theories that thrives on fear-mongering. That theory has about as much validity as what we heard in Arizona last summer. They're coming across with Ebola. Right? Even one of our, at the state level, one of the candidates for the legislature, part of his campaign was, well, you know, we got to stop them at the border because they're coming infected with Ebola in this country. It's sort of this fear-mongering, hate the other. And whatever it takes, you know, this is what this sounds like. Yes?
I've been really privileged for a little while now. I'm an international friend to international students at CSU. And it just happened, and I'm so grateful. Through 2 of the students, one from Mexico, through her, I have met others from Central America. And there is a young couple with a 2-year-old. And I have sat with them several times now. They almost feel like they're without country. They didn't cross the border to come in, they came through school, but they don't feel they can go back. And they are absolutely terrified. They have told me stories. They said, we lived, you know, in a relatively safe neighborhood, if there is such a thing. But Juanita actually worked for a bank in Honduras, and she was working with the poorer neighborhoods to do what she can to get some changes done there. But she said the corruption all over it is just absolutely unbelievable. And she said, you know, I said, well, the United States has played a big part in this. And she said, anything that's corrupt plays a part in it. She said, our government is corrupt. The gangs are frightening. A 13 or 14-year-old young girl can't go out at night. I mean, go visit a friend. She's likely to be taken by somebody. They are, as you said, sometimes trafficked, sometimes raped, sometimes never seen again. They have a 2-year-old son, but they are they don't, even their parents don't want them to come back. It's really horrible. So I validate everything you're saying.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Are you ever worried when you have people in your home that Border Patrol will harass you?
No, the reason for that, when they are released from ICE detention, they're released to Catholic Social Services, but they're released with a document ordering them, wherever their destination is in the United States, they must report to the nearest ICE facility. So they're given an appointment, date, time, and place. So they have this legal documentation from ICE. But they're under the protection of Catholic Social Services. So when we take them in, they have a protected legal status. They've already been processed through Homeland Security. So we're just practicing hospitality and getting them, taking them in that night. And the first thing the moms want to do is put the babies and children in the showers and baths. Because they haven't had a shower or bath in 3 to 4 weeks. They want their dirty clothes that they're wearing washed and dried. They want a hot meal. They want a warm bed. And they want to make telephone calls to coordinate buying the bus ticket so that they can get out the next morning. And so, no, to answer your question. But let me say something for the record, because El Salvador keeps coming up. For the sake of transparency and honesty, I'm retired from the military, the Army. I was in the Army for 22 years. Special Operations, Special Forces was my career field. In 1988, 1989, I was a military advisor in El Salvador. That we were funding. And so for the sake of transparency, I want to put that out. So many times people ask me, Mike, how can you come from this militant background in Special Forces in El Salvador during this horrific military dictatorship? And now you're helping Central Americans. You're even taking them into your house. So, yeah, so I needed to put that out there. So.
There's a story, there's a conversion story in there. There's a story of a strange, as Wesley would say, a strange warming of the heart. I don't know what Calvin would say. Convicted, we call it convicted.
I think it's part of that Jesuit tradition. As a non-practicing Catholic for over 50 years.
God use any instrument. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mike and Susan, are any others doing what you're doing?
Yes, but not enough. When we had the surge last summer, it started off very small. There was one human rights organization in Tucson that was taking them in. But when the surge began, the small NGO was so small, they didn't have the logistical capacity. They tried setting up, to their credit, when Border Patrol would drop off families. You may have 20 or 30 or more women and children at the Greyhound bus depot. Greyhound gave them their storage facility to open up kitchen, to open up a clothes closet, because sometimes they had to stay there for 12 or more hours. Well, there were so many that Catholic Social Services took it over. And so Catholic Social Services opened up a safe house. So the way it's organized, well, the way it was organized last year is that we had a huge community meeting citywide. And there was probably 250, 300 volunteers that showed up at Most Holy Trinity Catholic Church to respond to minors being dumped off, families being dumped off at the Greyhound bus station. So we organized into days of the week as teams, as support teams, taking them all in. So we volunteered for Thursday. But we said, we want to specifically provide hospitality overnight. So we've been doing that since last June the 19th. So there are others, but after almost a year, a lot of that volunteerism has sort of fallen by the wayside. And so now there's skeleton crews remaining. Maybe they didn't think the surge would continue into the next year, but it is. So to answer your question, yes, there's others, but we could sure use a whole lot more.
Yeah, and it's not just Thursdays anymore. I mean, it could be any day of the week that we will get a call. Doesn't matter which, it just depends on how many people they get that night and if they cannot get out and they already have a full house. A couple weeks ago, or a month or so ago, when the roads were so bad, when there were so many terrible ice storms in the central United States, the buses were not going, the roads were closed down, and so one day's group of migrants got on top of the next days and the next day, so it was a real problem then to find enough hospitality for everyone. But I have to say, I think Mike and I are the first people that they call. We were one of the earlier volunteers, and we rarely say no. We have the time, we have the extra room, so we try and say yes as often as we can.
I have a question. If we legalize drugs in this United States of America, what would that do with South America's, Ecuador's, whatever problems?
What was the question again, the first part?
If we legalize drugs.
If we were to legalize drugs, would that alleviate the problem? What would be the effect?
Lawyer?
I don't want to respond.
That question came up today at lunch. One of the international students asked, and I said, well, being in Colorado, what do you expect? Because drugs, marijuana is legalized here, and in Arizona for medical purposes only. What that does, as certainly Colorado, I don't know if it's manufactured here, but now it becomes an economic enterprise in competition with Mexico, the drug cartels. And so now it becomes a transnational economic issue. I know the production here undermines the cost in Mexico. So now the profit motive on the Mexican side is now threatened. One, you're growing it here, and you're probably growing better multa here than in Mexico. So possibly there may be economic competition. I don't know. But I think that was probably one of the issues that was never considered during the campaigning for legalization here. I know Washington has followed suit, and other states are following suit, and if this continues, it's going to become not so much a political social issue, but also an economic issue, a capital issue. In Colorado and the drug cartels, La Mafia, and Sonora.
If I can add also to that, we understand that in Guatemala, because that's where the primary number of the guests that we have stay with us are coming from, often these people, they need to sell what little land they have to get whatever money they can. And give up their land, and from what we understand, the cartels are taking over and are now growing poppies on them. So even in 2 or 3 years when they will, most of them probably will be deported, they have no land to go back to, and it's controlled by the cartels.
No, you know, the only thing I was gonna mention is that the demand for the drugs comes from here, right? So, I honestly haven't done much thinking through to the logical conclusion of what would happen if it was legalized, but I think that the issue here is just to stop buying drugs, right? We're creating the demand.
Yeah, I mean, it's us.
And I don't know what legalization would do other than regulate it and bring the government involved into it. But if the cartels can undercut the price of Colorado's marijuana, you know, you're still going to have a demand for illegal drugs if they're undercutting the price. We're just going to have to see if Colorado is an example, a microcosm that could be an example for what would happen if it was legalized. I don't see that that's going to happen. But.
It would be nice.
Yes, sir.
One of the things I'm wondering about 70 years ago, I was hired to work in the southern mountains with blacks. And it was dangerous to be known as a white person working with blacks. And I got threats all the time. Does this happen to you in your kinds of work? Do they threaten you, anybody?
I have not been threatened.
No.
The only one that threatened me is my tribe, my government, because I was putting out water on the reservation. And elected officials, my legislature, which is comparable to Congress of the Northern Tribal Council, was considering passing a resolution a couple of years ago. Now, a resolution has the same enforcement power as a law. So my legislative council was considering passing a resolution naming me and some others as terrorists. Had they gone forward and passed that law, I would be on the no-fly list sooner than I would be here on the Greyhound bus. So this is my own tribal government.
What is it, faith-wise and commitment-wise to keep doing what you're doing?
Is that for the both of us or for me?
Oh, go ahead.
Your question is faith-wise.
Yeah.
It's everything. We had one of the archbishops from Guatemala came out last summer, and he conducted a mass on the reservation because he wanted to do it in Indian country on the border in honor of all migrants who died, are dying, and who will die in the desert. But he wanted it on native soil. And so David Garcia and I hosted him. And so after he said his mass, he opened the floor for discussion, and he recognized me for my human rights work, putting on water. And I said it then, and I will say it now. You know, I'm attacked politically, even by my own tribal government. I said, but as I told the Archbishop, and this faith community literally in the desert, you need to understand, I put out water in the desert in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Thank you.
What is the objection of your tribal council to putting out water
They object because the Donald of the Nation has taken whole cloth this Department of Homeland Security narrative that says undocumented migrants crossing the border, crossing through the Donald of the Nation, are terrorists or potential terrorists. They are the enemy. So when you can translate, use dehumanizing language like them, the other, the wetbacks, it's a slippery slope, that they become the evil ones. And in the name of national security, we have to stop them. And so that's why. And also part of it, every federally recognized tribe receives federal funds from Congress for infrastructure, education, housing, judicial, and on and on and on. I don't think anybody on the reservation, including elected officials, will criticize the federal government, specifically the Border Patrol on the reservation en masse. Is what I call an occupying army in Indian country.
How do they get around that? Because you have your tribal law enforcement and your entire justice system within each tribe. So I thought that the feds had to have permission from the tribe to come on reservations in order to assist only if the tribal law enforcement, judicial folks want them to come on.
This is what I call the myth of sovereignty. And here's why. Yeah. And here's why. And I'm saying it as a Native person. Here's why. United States Border Patrol is a federal law enforcement agency. Every federally recognized tribe with a reservation, that reservation is first and foremost federal trust land. Federal trust land. So because it's first and foremost federal trust land, and Border Patrol are a federal law enforcement agency, Border Patrol has primary law enforcement jurisdiction on all federal lands, including 100 miles from any border to the interior. The U.S.-Mexico border, the U.S.-Canadian border, and most coastlines. 100 miles in, on all those 4 directions, Border Patrol can stop you because they have primary law enforcement jurisdiction. And so I hope I've answered your question. Because people always, people always ask me, well, what's the Border Patrol doing on the reservation? Why are they in Indian country? It's what I've been referring to lately. This sort of feels like Manifest Destiny 2.0.
We have a whole bunch of questions. Okay, go ahead. This is great.
Just this week, I read an open letter written by women and children in one of the for-profit detention centers in Texas. And in the letter, they say they've been there for 8 months. And I'm just wondering, because it sounds like you work with people that have come through these detention centers, what's the average amount of time they've been there? And I think these women may have a prior deportation or something, but I'm just curious, because, and what accountability is there in these detention centers if they're for-profit centers?
So we were talking about this a little bit at dinner, because the families that Mike and Susan are seeing, in general, they're just spending a couple days, they're getting processed, and then they're being released. And then there's a whole other group of women and children who are being detained. And we're trying to figure out, well, who gets released and who gets detained, right? And all that we can figure out as attorneys, because the Colorado immigration attorneys were part of this American Immigration Lawyers Association. We were the first responders to the Artesia Detention Center in New Mexico when it opened up in July. So there was a group of Well, there were basically like 2 radical ex-nun attorneys in their 70s who said, basically, screw this, we're going down there. We don't care if we don't have clients, we're finding clients. And they got into the center and they started representing women. And then the rest of the Colorado attorneys kind of jumped into gear and started sending teams that rotated. So this is how I kind of have an insight into what was happening in Artesia, because I was providing remote support to them with briefs and just, you know, filings and everything. It seems like there were a group of women that entered within a 4-week period who were detained. And it wasn't an individual assessment. It was Jay Johnson, Secretary of Homeland Security, saying, this has to stop, and we're going to make a lesson out of these women. And those are the women that have been detained since July. Initially, the judges who were hearing those cases were granting bonds between $25,000 and $50,000. Then the judges switched, and all the cases were heard by our Denver immigration court judges by remote access, by video teleconferencing. And our judges, thankfully, were much more reasonable and started hearing the cases individually and granting between like $2,000 and $10,000 bonds based on prior deport orders, you know, criminal record, things like that, the more accurate measure of who should be granted a bond. So Artesia, a lot of those women bonded out, and the women who didn't bond out were sent to Dilley. So the detention centers that we have now for families are in Dilley, Texas, in Carnes, and Berks, which is in Pennsylvania. There's approximately 4,000 women and children who are detained. Then the children are as young as what Mike's talking about, infants. It's horrific. In 2009, there was a federal lawsuit that closed the last remaining family detention center, Hodo, which was also in Texas, and it was closed due to the egregious human rights abuses that were taking place there. And then all of a sudden, now in 2014, we see expansion of family detention, and it's because the United States is trying to teach a lesson, a deterrence, right? To say, don't come. They want these women who are detained to call their family and say, don't come, this is what happens. It's not a deterrent. The judges don't think it's a deterrent. My partners, my opposition, my ICE attorney friends say it's not a deterrent. It's not working. And it's slowly killing everyone. The immigration judges in Denver who hear these cases are distraught. The attorneys who have to prosecute these cases are distraught. The attorneys who are representing the women who are detained are distraught. It's a horrible, horrible situation. Kids are losing weight. You know, there was an article in the New York Times talks about how like a 21-month-old lost 9 pounds. A 21-month-old lost 9 pounds in the time that he was detained. I should have thought to bring some of my friends who actually were in Artesia, because most of the attorneys that went were also mothers and women, and I think that my friends who went have PTSD from seeing the women there nursing their babies, trying to take care of their babies. There was a chickenpox outbreak, there was a lice outbreak. They're not getting proper care, they're not getting proper treatment. Right now in Dilley, women are having their bonds reassessed because there was a class action lawsuit that was nationwide brought by some nonprofits that said, you can't not release these women. If they are asylum seekers and they've passed the first stage of their interview, they're eligible for parole, meaning they get released without paying a bond. And how can you treat them differently than any other asylum seeker that comes across the border? So this detention was deliberate, and it was well thought out, and it was purposeful to serve a purpose of deterrence. It's horrible, and I haven't even been there. I mean, I was like providing remote support, and I feel like it's, I can't even imagine being there with my infant. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
For Mike and Susan, I guess, I am curious because it is amazing, compassionate
people to open their homes to strangers in this way. And that will surely take a mental toll, emotional toll, physical toll. There's work to be done. And it also costs financially when you do that. How do you keep your act together? How are you encouraged? Is there any finances that come to you for your hosting, your feeding them from Catholic Charities? You have to provide support for those people, and I just wonder how you do it. And if you will be able to do that on the long haul. And if there is financial support, maybe others will also get on board with this.
Mm-hmm.
Who's gonna go first?
We do get the support of a lot of family and friends, you know, that how could I not talk about it? What's going on in your life, Susan? Well, we had 3 families this week. And so a lot of families and friends have given us donations, and then there's a church in Sahuarita, which is just south of Tucson. They have given us some funding over time too, because, you know, we give them dinner, and then I make sure they have a good breakfast the next morning before they leave, because who knows when they're going to have it, the next hot meal. We are going to thrift stores all the time, particularly in the winter time when they needed winter coats. You're going to South Dakota or Boston or wherever. We've been buying a lot of winter coats. When they are released from detention, all of their belongings are in a big clear plastic bag with the Homeland Security logo on it. So we try and get tote bags, roll-along luggage things, whatever, something else that they can put their belongings in. Catholic Community Services does give them a food packet and a health kit. But, you know, it's a cup of soup, maybe a couple apples, granola bars, you know, something that a lot of kids don't really want to eat. And so often when the families buy the tickets for them, they can include $50 so that the family will have a little spending money. But sometimes they can't afford that. So, you know, Mike and I, we don't have a lot of money, but we could not, with good conscience, send them a family on a bus for 3 days with no money. So we give them money, even though Catholic Community Services says that, you know, that's not something that they will do, but if we want to do it, we can. But every single time after we've seen a family off, we look at each other and we say, if you think you're having a bad day, it really puts life into perspective. And I tell you, every single time that they leave, it brings a tear to my eye, and they say, you know, we have no money to repay you, but your repayment will be in heaven. God will repay you. And you know, I just feel so blessed and honored to be able to do it, and it's probably been the most humbling experience of my life.
You know, if I could, I'm going to stand in with my wife, who, after speaking about the children on the border, heard our baby crying. You know, and it goes to what you're saying, and the question came up before too. How do you hang in there? How do you do this? And I, as we said at dinner, I did hospitality in Phoenix in the mid-'80s, and then again in the South End, in a Catholic worker house. And the idea is you do, this is a crazy idea, you do what Jesus taught us to do. When someone comes to you, you open your door. And, you know, we used to have students come down to our house in Phoenix. We had a soup line, 600 to 800 a night, 6 nights a week. We were taking in 12 people in 2 houses. And these students would come down wanting to work with the homeless. And they'd help on our soup line, and they'd come up after and say, you know, I'm a bit troubled because I have had such a great time here. And I would say, there's the start of the show. And I would say, no, this is how we're meant to be. And this is what brings, you know, theologically, this is what gives us happiness. Happy are those who seek justice and so on. You know, when I was in Phoenix, and I would be in a house on Thursday nights, and it would be raining out. In the, you know, November, it's a cold rain. It's a cold rain in the desert. And a family would come up, drive up from Iowa, and their axle broke in Flagstaff. And they roll into town with having fixed the car and having no pocket money. And they come knock on the door, it's raining out, there's 3 kids in the back seat. And they say, do you have a place for us to stay tonight? And you look at them and you say, yes. You know why God put you on the earth that day. And there's no better feeling and no better purpose in life. So I think it brings us, in a very deep way, happiness to love others as God loves us.
Just from my part, to try to continue that answer, how do I do it? Because of my experience to El Salvador, I had my own Damascus Road experience with the Campesino family. I was invited to share a meal at their table. And by what happened at that table, because I broke bread with this poor family, I was very conscious that the table was transformed into a communion table. And it was also transformed into the table of justice. And so out of that El Salvador experience, I bring that forward into the present. And so humility, as ironic as that may sound, keeps me going to serve the unloved when I have been loved so much. To take the stranger into your house. It's that transforming moment to take them in. And we are honored to have them in our house. And so when they leave, and 6 months later, they need the newborn after Susan. And so it's that sort of the power of humility. I see, at least from my perspective, I grew up poor off the reservation. But at least when I was growing up, we had that welfare net. As a high school senior and as a student body president, we were living on welfare. So fortunately, thanks be to God, I left welfare status in 1968. And so because of my own personal experience with poverty, that I see the migrant coming now. I see this latter-day exodus because that's what it is. They're fleeing the whip of the Pharaoh. Now what do I mean? I mean by that, extreme poverty. That's the Pharaoh that they're fleeing. So when we take them into our house, that's my understanding, that we are there to serve them. No questions asked.
mentioned the federal grant, the federal trust of the reservation. I spent time down in Shiprock on the Navajo Reservation about a year and a half ago. And I spent time with a family that lives in a mother, her daughter, her husband, and 2 children in a one-room, dirt-floored construct. I mean, you can't even really call it a building. No, they had 1 light, no plumbing, no running water, nothing. In spite of that, they were one of the happiest families I've ever met, believe it or not. And they lived under power lines. And I said, how? I don't understand. And it was the first time, I'm 71, but it was the first time that I understood they don't have the control that people think they do on the reservations. And there were 2 polluting plants, and we were there. I mean, we saw the black stuff come in. And they said, no, they can come in and build whatever they want. I mean, it was deplorable, absolutely deplorable. Is there a volunteer network for the 2 of you, either to give you relief, or you said that some of the people aren't doing it anymore, that they did it for a while, but they're not doing it anymore. Can you describe the community of people that's doing this down there, where you are?
Well, I think at the moment they have enough people. I mean, when I've talked to Galen, who's the coordinator for the program, he's an amazing young man. He's in his early 20s. He's a AmeriCorps volunteer. And I mean, you go over to Alita's house, the safe house, and, you know, there could be 12, 15, you know, Guatemalans or refugees there. Most of them children just running around, and he's just trying to keep everything under control. But I think at the moment they have enough people, and I think, as far as I know, he said if they ever got too many, they would open a church and put out cots if they did not have enough people for hospitality. Now, there was just this past week a call out for more volunteers, so I hope that they will get more volunteers within the next couple of weeks. And, you know, comes spring and summer, if there is indeed a surge, we'll have to see.
Well, let me get some competition going. We got a donation from United Church of Christ. I say that as a volunteer. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that and plug the faith communities. The United Church of Christ in Green Valley, I go to Samaritans meeting, which is another group. So churches from the country send money to United Church of Christ, or my former church, Southside Presbyterian Church, for social justice. And so out of these social justice funds, Randy Meyer, the pastor, said, Mike, how are you guys doing financially? You need more money. And so he will write us a check for $500, all going toward food, gas, going to the thrift stores. And so to answer your question, yeah, that's how we get funding. So.
When you mentioned that you put out water, and I would presume because there's all these people coming through the desert that you would have come across someone or someone would have come up to you. Have you ever had that experience? And if so, what was it like?
I had that experience today. One of the international students.
No, I think she meant when you're putting water out and the migrants.
Oh, have I come firsthand? No. Because when I put out water, I leave. I've come across migrants.
Is that your question?
Yeah, you know, if you don't speak the same language, what is it like to encounter another human being who's in despair? And, like, what goes through your head? Like, what is that experience like? Because I have no frame of reference what it's like to be servicing people out in the desert. Like, what is it like to service someone like that?
I've had several encounters with migrants alone. They've been chased by Border Patrol. and the group gets scattered. Or a helicopter comes down and creates this dust storm called dusting, and it scatters the migrants. So if I'm driving out of the desert and I encounter one of them, the first thing I offer them water, because that's what they're in most need of. But specifically to answer your question, I guess what's my relationship to that person, and what do I feel?
Or maybe what was the first person that you met or came across?
Got the one in Crossing, Arizona. Mike's been in numerous documentaries. One called Crossing Arizona that came out in 2005, I believe, and it's still pretty accurate, although Arizona is not seeing quite the numbers of migrants crossing the desert as they were then. But anyway, in the film is Mike's encounter with one of the migrants. However, Mike will tell you what he said off camera was really telling.
Yeah, because we pulled up, I had the film crew with me, the producers, and there was a single solitary migrant standing on the side of the road in the middle of the desert. So we stopped and I offered him water. So the producer jumps out of the car and he says, I need to film this. And so for the couple of 10 or more minutes that he had to set up his camera, he had to set up the mic, everything. So I'm talking to this migrant in the desert. I gave him water, I gave him food, and I gave him hope. And so I began the conversation because he wants to continue north. And he asked me, how far is it to Phoenix? How many hours is it to Phoenix? I said, brother, it's days. And I cannot give you enough water for you to carry, for you to survive another day. If you go into the desert with water, you will drink that water in less than a day and you will die. So what you need to do is walk to the highway and turn yourself into the Border Patrol. And so, because he thought that he was going to walk to Phoenix in a couple hours. Well, just give me 2 gallons of water. Because from the border to where I encountered him, it was 17 miles, and he had to walk in. It took him 3 days to walk 17 miles. And Phoenix, as a crow flies, another 135, another 40 miles. So he's thinking, well, just give me some water, and I'll walk to Phoenix. And so when he became convinced that he couldn't make it in the desert, and he specifically said, this is off camera, he said, I'm coming here to look for work. My children are hungry, and my wife needs surgery in Mexico. So if I go north, del norte, I know I will die. But at least if I die, I will die trying to feed my children. So he asked me, which is worse? For me to go north and die, knowing that I'm trying to feed my children, or for me to go back to Mexico and watch my 3 children starve to death? Yeah. So when you put it in that perspective, he's going back to Mexico. And this father of 3 children is going to watch his children slowly starve to death before his eyes. And his wife needs surgery that he can't pay for. These are the conditions that send him north and to encounter him in the desert. But specifically to your question, I have the conscious thought that when I meet a migrant in the desert, I ask myself first as I'm walking up to them, because they don't know me. I wear the cross, but they may think, oh, it's a trick. You know, as I'm walking toward them, I have the conscious thought, is that you, Lord? You know, because the question was, I was in prison and you visited me. I was sick and you visited me. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me water. And so I'm thinking, Lord, is that you? And how much water do you want? And so from a theological, from the heart, I ask myself that question first and foremost. And knowing that mental frame, that spiritual frame of, this is who I am in the desert. As a thorn on all of them, I'm a desert person. But I am of the desert. You know, the earth is my mother. And so I know that when migrants walk across, and also from the Roman tradition, at least in the Southwest, the Virgen de Guadalupe also walks with them. And so I ask myself that question in Spanish, you know. You don't fool me. You don't fool me, Lord. I know it's you. I know it's you. In the dirty clothes of a migrant. I know it's you. My heart tells me it's you. I recognize you. And so with that with those spirit eyes, I think I see Christ in the desert. And how can I not give water? Don't get me started. And this is from a recovering Presbyterian.
Yes.
So Mike pointed out to us that we are all here from immigrants. My grandfather came when he was 16. He had a brother here. What legally is going on that made it okay and easy for him to come over because he didn't want to be conscripted in the Russian army, being forced into the Russian army? He joined his brother, and he had that ability, and young people the same age as my grandfather, in this day and age, don't have that same right.
Katie, this is a question for you.
Okay. I'm ready.
I'm going to repeat it. The question is, many of us have ancestors who were immigrants who came to the United States, and it's all part of our stories. What has changed that now this is becoming prohibitive, that people aren't welcomed in the same way?
Well, there's been a number of laws that have been passed that have been progressively more restrictive. So, from my perspective, 1996, when Clinton's Congress passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Accountability Act, that was the harshest laws that we've seen on the books. So we always had some type of immigration restriction policy. Going back to the 1800s, the Chinese immigrants came over and built our railroads, and then we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically said you have to leave now because you're not useful here to us anymore. So it's just gotten progressively more and more restrictive. And 1996 became the most restrictive, and that was not only for basis of deportation. A lot more crimes can fall under the category that would render someone deportable, but it also limited the number of visas available for certain countries. We've always had a quota system, but it's become significantly smaller. So it's just gotten progressively harder for people to be able to stay here lawfully or migrate here with lawful status. Right, Jack?
So what's the answer?
That's a great question. I was going to have to get around to that.
The one thing that I'll say while he's quiet is there is no need to have family detention. Like, we've already proven that we're bad at doing that, and it's only getting worse with this new resurgence of detention. So one is to just eliminate family detention. I think that in addition to the families who are detained, there's about 30,000 other individuals who are detained each day, and some of them are on minor traffic offenses that they're subject to detention. So that whole system needs to be reorganized. There are alternatives to detention, such as check-ins, ankle monitors, having places like Catholic Charities that serve as kind of a supervisory agency that are much better than detention. Second is that we really need to look at our guest worker program. I mean, much of what we eat and consume today, if it's from the United States, was farmed and picked by immigrant laborers who have no status. So that whole system needs to be revamped. And we also need to make it easier for families to stay together. So our immigration laws are based on family reunification, but we make it so hard for families to come. There's such a long wait. If I'm a lawful permanent resident and my husband is Mexican, they're only hearing cases from like 1994. If I file a petition for him today, he's got a 10-year wait. Well, how is that? I mean, it's ridiculous. The other piece of it, related mostly to Central America, is that the ways in which our immigration courts have interpreted the definition of a refugee is so narrow that most of the kids who are fleeing gang violence won't fit. Our immigration courts don't believe that what these kids are experiencing is persecution. So that whole system has to shift. And that's just going to take, I don't know, maybe a field trip to El Salvador for all of our immigration judges. I don't know how to give them the opportunity to put themselves in the shoes of these children and moms who are coming. So those are my suggestions.
Yes, sir.
Follow up to that, what organizations are helping to promote the changes in those laws? In Hungary, we have Bread for the World. We mentioned this at some of our previous gatherings. Is there a similar organization as an advocacy for these things you're talking about?
Yes, there are amazing immigration-related groups. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has a huge advocacy branch. There's a group called American Immigration Council in DC that also promotes policy change. The National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild does policy. There's Immigrant Legal Resource Center. I mean, there's a bunch of big ones that are working to do more, like the ACLU Immigrant Rights Project. They're doing more than just representing individual clients, right? They're really pushing for reform. They're pushing for systematic change. They're writing amicus briefs to support these kind of changes that I'm talking about.
So I wonder if through this program we could get the list of those organizations.
That's a great
somehow
Yeah.
and get it out there. Because I get very frustrated when I come to these sessions. We have great intellectual discussions of the problem, but we never get to what can we do tomorrow?
What to do.
I know. You also can't forget the Pope and the Council of Bishops who have been pushing for this. You could probably speak more about that, Mike. I mean, if the Pope and the Council of Bishops can't change too many minds.
What is it going to take in the coalition, people of conscience and people of faith, to move this country to recognize that the brown is the new black, as far as human rights and civil rights? I think we have to understand it as a moral question, that America did not move during the civil rights era until discrimination and segregation became a national moral issue. So once that happened, then we had federal legislation, removing some of these prohibitions. And so I think it's going to take a matter of conscience, not just the faith community, the legal community, the social justice at the grassroots level communities rising up. Because I was a part of a four-border coalition, Southern Borders Communities Coalition, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And we went to Congress to lobby for comprehensive immigration reform. And we were part of that network in the halls of Congress pushing for reform. The Senate, I believe it was 2013, passed immigration reform bill. The House did nothing. So now nothing has moved in over 3 years now. Because the rhetoric is, well, we can't do immigration reform until we seal the borders. Seal the borders, more militarization, more demonization.
I'd like to call on you, sir, you had your hand up, yes.
It seems to me that when we want to
Take the
address...
mic, would you?
Yeah, where's the mic?
It seems to me that when we want to address the question of what we can do, we need to go a little bit deeper to understand the root of the problem. If we don't address the root of the problem, well then we're going to end up shifting the chairs on the Titanic. What is the root of the problem? I think we need to look at not just government. Government is, yes, it has a broken system. But who controls our government? We don't. We don't. There's a ruling class in this country. We have to realize that this is a class-based society, and it is run not by President Obama. He has power, yes, but there is power that surrounds him. Notice who he brought into his cabinet in his first administration. Wall Street people. So my point is that government is not the major problem. It is the private sector. It is the corporations. And if you don't believe that, well then I think we better talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Some of us may not know what that is, but that is being negotiated right at this moment, in secret, on behalf of major global corporations, who will deprive the sovereignty not only of countries around the world from which we get immigrants, but it will deprive the citizens of this country of their own sovereignty. And they're already doing it. What do I mean by that? Well, there's 29 chapters to this agreement. There are 11 countries around the Pacific Rim that are involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 29 chapters. There's only 4 of those chapters that really deal with trade. What are the other 25 chapters about? It is guaranteeing global corporations the right to intervene in all of the countries of the world. The right to protect their profits. That's what it's about. The answer to the question asked earlier about the drug conspiracy to send immigrants across the border, well, just follow the money. The drug cartels are interested in money. They're not interested in messing with the border patrol. They want to avoid those folks or get guns from them. Right? They did. So my question would be, if there's a question in what I'm saying, is that we have to look at global corporations and their power. They control our government. And you can see how sectors of our society, our political society, are siding with those corporations and their interests in order to deprive us of our rights to the kinds of justice that we are talking about here.
And he's right on this specific point. Remember SB 1070? Once it got the United States Supreme Court, it became a federal issue. It was no longer specific only to Arizona. Because once the Supreme Court ruled and upheld Section 5D, the Show Me Your Papers, it became federal legislation. And we now know after the fact that Correction Corps of America, the private prison industry that has 4 prisons in Arizona, had a hand in the legislation, in writing the bill and passing that through the Arizona legislature, SB 1070. Why? To fill up their private prisons so that the American taxpayer would pay this for-profit prison system for the number of migrants filling those beds every night. So it was for-profit prison industry behind SB 1070. And this is what we have to be on the lookout for. And so, you know, there are numerous examples where corporate America is behind anti-immigration, these bills.
One more question, yes, right there.
Thank you. Mine's an announcement again. This Saturday, our representative from Congress, Jared Polis, will be in Fort Collins. And it's a chance for all of us to go to his town hall, talk to him about this issue. He has been a strong supporter of immigration reform in the House. And he needs to hear from constituents who say, go, take the lead and do this. Because in past town halls, he has been hearing more from the opposition to reform. And he needs to know that we're out here and we would support him in that. So the meeting will be held down at the courthouse on Oak Street from 1:30 to 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon in Fort Collins. And in Loveland, next Saturday, the day before Easter, he'll be in Loveland having another town hall that afternoon at the Rialto Theater. So those are 2 times that you can go. And this information is on his website, if you don't write it down tonight.
Let me second what you said about Jared Polis. He and his staff, he has a dedicated staff member who works with immigration issues. They are amazing. They have intervened at a number of cases for our organization, for private attorneys, and they are amazing. And as much support as you can give them in what they're doing, the better. Right, Jack?
You know, we're gonna wrap it up here. I'm gonna give you the second to last word, and I'm gonna take the last word. Give us a good word.
The only thing that I can say in closing, remember immigrants, nation, immigrant nation, this is who we are. And we can't turn our backs on the immigrants coming now. The next time you're in your bathroom and you're brushing your teeth and the mirrors are foggy, wipe the mirror clean. Put down your toothbrush and say, elderly grandfather who came a long time ago to this country, speak to me in my first language. My mind may not understand it, but my heart will. Because elder grandfather, I am the seed of your loins. Elder grandmother, from the old country, speak to me in my first language. Because my mind does not understand, but my heart will. Because elder grandmother, I am the seed of your womb. That you stand upon the humble shoulders of immigrants. Remember who you are. But also most significantly, remember whose you are. Amen.
For as Jesus said, we are who is came from the Father and is going to the Father. Jesus was on the journey to the Father. And all of us with him, we pray. Do I close this up or do you? I think you should. I'm the MC, you close it up.
I'll wrap this up quickly. I just want to say thank you to Michael for moderating and to Mike for sharing stories. Thank you, Susan, for amplifying those stories that you two share. Thank you, Katie, for your insight and your compassion. And thank you, Jack, for putting up with a lot of adult talk tonight. And thank you all for being here.
There are flyers for our next event in the series over on the table. It'll be April 14th, and Charles Clark will be coming back, the economist.
There's still some cookies in the back, too.